Hey, welcome back to Revenue Optimization Radio. It's the one show that takes a look at, well, how to optimize your revenue. Hosted by Patrick Morrissey, CMO of Altify. Revenue Optimization Radio is brought to you by those good folks. So why hold back? Let's have them tell you more right now. Welcome, Patrick.
Hey, Paul, how are you?
Hi, friends. Welcome back to another edition of Revenue Optimization Radio. I'm excited to continue a conversation with Bronwyn Saglimbeni that you probably heard the first part of last week. If you didn't, you need to, because there was a mountain of goodness in there, from how do you think about the art of presentation and communication to how do you set yourself up to be successful, not only playing the big stage, but in a meeting. How do you become effective? So Bronwyn, give us a little bit of perspective. If you hadn't heard the last podcast, you're a communications coach. You coach people for TED Talks. You get them ready to go on Oprah. You keynote people's sales kickoffs. You are what good looks like in communication and helping others get from, even if you're really good, helping them get to great.
That's right. That's right. I specialize in helping people shine. It's what my obsession is. And yeah, you got it. And I've got a podcast, 20 Minutes with Bronwyn, because everybody needs a pocket Bronwyn before they have to give a presentation or whatever. You need a little drive-by communication coaching, which is what I do on my podcast.
I cannot agree more. The podcast is dynamite. I would 100% everybody tune into 20 Minutes with Bronwyn. It is magnetic. And I think that's maybe a good anchor for this discussion. And what I want to get into is, particularly for sales and sales leaders, what are the barriers to communication? And I was struck by this weekend because I was doing a little bit of research and I found some statistics on Salesforce's Trailhead site about what are the topics or what are the capabilities that most often appear in job recs for sales managers. And the biggest single thing, 60% of job recs for sales leaders list good communication skills. And one of the other big skills that was on that bubble chart, if you go to trailhead.com, you can actually see this, is 20% of the time they want great presentation skills. And what jumped off the page at me is that most salespeople, much less sales leaders, they may have had a wealth of sales training. They have never had communication training. And that's really frightening.
It is crazy. It's like we're all left to our own devices because we think communication just come naturally. I think crappy communication comes pretty naturally, you know, unless you're one of those really lucky people that was raised by Bodhisattva Buddha parents where everything was communicated in the most perfect way possible, which is definitely not me. And most people I know didn't get raised that way. We are all coming to the table with really bad habits.
Right.
If you ask me, what's the biggest barrier we have? What's the biggest barrier salespeople and sales managers have? I think it's the same barrier humans have, which is we get so caught up in what we're trying to push into the world that we are not perceiving what's happening in the room. We're not listening. Or if we are listening, we're listening through a filter that is so jammed up with preconceptions, fears, doubts, anxieties, projections, name it. So half the time we're operating with a really poor grasp of what reality actually is, right? We project all kinds of nonsense onto conversations, or we miss the opportunity that was like the golden moment to drive home a point or to share a point of view or to teach something. We miss it because we're in our heads. We're playing chess and thinking about our next move instead of being in it with the person across the table from us.
And that's interesting in a sales context, because most of the time a salesperson and the sales team, the entire revenue team, is going in with some sort of plan or some sort of an agenda. And one of the things that you hit on and emphasized in the last podcast was the need as well as the opportunity to create a moment. And to create connection. So when you think about that from a salesperson or from a sales leader's perspective, where you're trying to coach people on the team to get ready for the meeting or to facilitate the dialogue or build the relationship, where do you start that conversation from?
Where do you start the conversation in terms of how to plan the presentation, or where do you start the conversation when you go into the room, or what do you mean by that?
Sorry, let me be a little bit more precise. That's a good question. How do you start the conversation or do an assessment with somebody if you're brought in to coach communication skills about how to assess just how good of a communicator am I or the team? And how do we start to put the building blocks in place to help us be more effective?
Yeah, it's a great question. If it's a team, I really like to hear what the symptoms are, because usually you don't hire a communication coach when things are just going swimmingly. You
Right.
usually hire a communication coach when there's a next level that needs to be hit. So I like to know, what does success look like and where are we falling short and what are the symptoms? And then I like to look at the assets, like, okay, well, these are the symptoms, the bad habits that are holding us back, or the things that we're not gelling, or there's not a good vibe, there's not a good ensemble performance happening in a room at a pitch.
So let me give you an example to kind of frame or just put a little bit of context in this for discussion purposes. A common use case we see all the time is organizations trying to figure out, particularly if they're selling in the mid-market, trying to sell more enterprise deals and work in enterprise accounts. And there's a couple different things that kind of go to communication. One is I have to talk to more people and navigate the organization and the politics and understand who's who in the zoo. But I also need to be compelling in speaking to a C-level audience.
Oh, this is it. Yeah. And this actually gets to the heart of the lion's share of work that I do. The minute I get a team that isn't accustomed to talking to the C-suite, instantly they come to me and they say, well, I'm fine with this and this and this, but God, the CFO walks in the room, or CMO, or the CEO walks in the room, and then ... right? The core secret, if you remember nothing else from this conversation, what makes you a good communicator is what mental stories you allow yourself to tell yourself when you are communicating. So for example, CEO walks in. The temptation is to immediately put CEO on pedestal above you, right? Mm-hmm. There's a problem with that. By seeing yourself as inferior, it instantly changes the way you talk. Right? Your body language might be shifty because you feel less than. Your brain isn't thinking as clearly because you're intimidated, and your brain is getting messages of like danger, danger, danger. And we know that physiological process of fight and flight is very bad for critical thinking.
Yes.
Right? So it shuts down the part of our brain that was designed to solve problems, empathize, be creative. It's all gone in that moment if you really get triggered by the CEO walking in the room. Right? So allowing your mind to indulge in fantasies or narratives around, oh my God, it's the CEO and I'm just the lowly fill in the blank.
Right.
It has very real consequences for how good you are in the room. Right? And by the way, the CEO, or I don't care who it is, especially people in power, they do not want people that work for them to be so intimidated by them that they're paralyzed and mobilized and not giving their best. They want everybody with their A game. And your A game comes by believing in your own fundamental equality with everyone around the room. It's no problem. There's difference in titles, there's difference in levels of experience, of course. But existentially, you are every bit as worthy as the CEO is, whoever she is.
Yeah, that's interesting because I know of no sales training book where anybody states it that emphatically. They talk about process and doing your homework and how these people might be motivated and how they behave.
And that's important. That is all super duper important. But it's only half the game, right? So if you know that you, and I'm not saying that this is your trigger, but a lot of us get triggered. Inferiority is probably the number one trigger that I help people deal with. If you know that's a trigger for you, and this is the other thing, another thing that you can say about good communicators. Good communicators have really good pre-game rituals. Mm-hmm. Don't just walk into a meeting with someone you know is going to trigger your inferiority issues. Get into your pre-game ritual, just like an athlete would. Right? So for example, if I'm working with somebody super high profile or somebody who I'm incredibly intimidated by, I don't just let that meeting happen, right? I do my ritual. I write down, this is what success looks like. This is how I could be of help to this person. I know what I know. They know what they know. Together we'll know more. Just because I'm not a PhD in astrophysics like this person who's giving a TED Talk is, doesn't mean I'm not worthy to teach them, right? And I get that into my head. I visualize success. I do all the things that are part of my ritual so that when I walk into the room, they are getting the absolute sparkliest, strongest, most articulate, most ready to engage and help version of me that they can get. What amazes me is when I do my keynotes on this, I will ask the audience, how many of you have a pre-game ritual for big moments at work, whether that's a pitch or a review or whatever it is?
Yep.
Maybe 2% of the audience raises their hands. That is crazy. The only way to get really good at communicating is to get your interior life figured out before you walk into the room. Right?
That's interesting because I think a lot of people overlook this, and you use the professional athlete example. So I think about the whole ritual Steph Curry goes through, both physical and mental, before he walks out on the court, or it's like the choose your favorite influence, but Anthony Robbins talks about that as getting in state. It's like, how do you get ready to nail your A game? But I want to rewind you back to what I thought I heard you say, which was it's the stories, the challenge with effective communication is it's the stories we tell ourselves.
Absolutely.
What are the blockers? Take that apart for me. Tell me what the blockers are that get in the internal narrative that are blockers to communicating effectively.
That's it. There's 5 that I've seen. I mean, there's probably 1,000, but over the 20 years I've been doing this, there's really 5 key blockers. I call them junk thoughts. One is we just talked about feeling inferior.
Okay.
But the other side of that same coin is feeling superior. People that walk into a room thinking they're all that and a bag of chips are terrible listeners, right?
Yes.
If you are somebody that people are intimidated by, they're not going to tell you the truth because you scare them, right? So not only do we have to feel enough and equal to, we also have to feel enough and equal to those we feel superior to.
Yep.
And there's a whole bunch of ways that I help people because that's something that comes up a lot. But inferiority or superiority, those are both very toxic thought patterns. And that's number 1 block. Number 2 is scarcity. There's not enough time. There's not enough money. There's not enough support. There's not enough. And the reason is, look, sometimes there isn't enough time and there isn't enough money and support.
Right.
Reality is what it is. But as a communication coach, I don't care if that's true or false. I just know that by indulging in it, I get the worst out of you. So for example, if you think there's not enough time, your brain is in freak out mode, panic mode, which means good ideas aren't probably going to come to you. You're going to be short with the people around you. So when I work with people to overcome that, I give them a mantra. There is enough. There is enough. There is enough. Or my other favorite one is, how might I? How might I move this mountain with only X minutes or X budget? And that kind of creates like a twinkle in the eye, like a playfulness, like, okay, how might I pull this off? What would that look like? Right? Yep. Another one is perfectionism, right? Perfectionism is when you walk into a meeting and you're sweating the slide deck, right? You're sweating the bullets. You're reading the script. Unless the meeting goes exactly the way you in your mind have envisioned it, it's a failure. Perfectionism is just a big ego attack, right? It's just trying to over-rotate on managing everything and controlling everything. So what do we do instead of get locked into a state of perfectionism? I always repeat this mantra: the goal is connection, not perfection. There are salespeople that have gone in with a slide deck, and within 2 minutes, they realize that slide deck was pursuing the wrong avenue. And now they know the right avenue. The good salespeople close that slide deck and have a conversation based on the right avenue. The salespeople that are on the learning side of things white knuckle it through that wrong presentation right till the end. In fact, I had a team recently tell me about that, how they just white knuckled this presentation despite seeing the faces of people checking their watches and hemming and hawing and rolling eyes. They just kept white knuckling it through the end. And then by the end, the CMO stood up and just yelled at them, like, how dare you waste 45 minutes of our time? Right. But if the goal is connection, not perfection, you see somebody checking their watch, rolling their eyes and giving you feedback, and you go, whoa. Time out. I can tell I'm losing you here. What's on your mind? What's going on? And being willing to let go of the agenda to go on the actual journey you're there to go on.
Yes.
Right. Another one is us versus them thinking. We get so tribal, especially in the Valley, especially in technology, that sometimes we can see the person across the table as them versus the us. How might we do this together?
Right.
And it creates an element of judgment. It creates a tribalism vibe. The other narrative that's really destructive is a victim narrative. Anytime we hear ourselves say things like, I don't have a choice. I'm trapped. I've got to do this. There's no other way. Why me? Right? That's a victim narrative. And the reason that's so destructive to communication is that the version of me that comes forward, if I'm engaging in victim thinking, I don't want to be here, I wish I wasn't here, but I have to be here, that's not the best me. So I remember my mentor, Christine Schaefer, once told me, I was moaning about something, and she said, Bronwyn, you always have a choice. Enough. You always have a choice. And when we go into situations that are tricky, troubling, scary, that might trigger a victim narrative, if we arrest that and say, I always have a choice, and I choose to show up as X in this meeting, or I choose to deal with hard feedback by whatever that process is, that's your strongest self coming forward. So if you boil it all down, getting a great presentation, creating a great slide deck, being quote unquote good in front of the room. Those are all the external manifestations of an internal state that is fundamentally worthy, curious, excited, empowered, and ready to listen. And that's really the big work. I mean, I spend a lot of my keynote time and my speech time covering that stuff and giving people techniques for that.
That is fantastic. And I want to come back to a few of those techniques and rules of the road here in a second. We'll pause just a minute and pay the bills. We're speaking with Bronwyn Saglimbeni about what does great look like in communication.
We live in a subscription economy. You're only as successful as your customers, and that requires a mindset shift from what's our strategy for the customer to what's our customer's strategy and how can we help. Focusing on your customers' needs and providing value in every interaction is critical to building long-term relationships and sustained sales success. The challenge for most sales leaders and their teams is their sales process doesn't match how customers buy in today's digital world. Sustained growth and sales execution are impossible because the revenue team isn't aligned with consistent process and methodology to understand their customers' people and their problems. Altify's customer revenue optimization solutions activates the entire revenue team with a combination of strategy, methodology, and applications to help companies deliver more value to their customers. The result is increased sales velocity, improved win rates, and increased customer satisfaction. With a CRO strategy, now you can effectively collaborate across the entire revenue team to win new business and unlock more cross-sell and upsell opportunities. Built natively on the Salesforce platform, Altify helps revenue leaders and their teams achieve sustained revenue growth and sales success. Visit Altify.com today to see how they help accelerate sales performance for some of the world's best sales teams, including Autodesk, Comcast, GE, Honeywell, Salesforce, Tableau, and United Health Group.
And with that, we hand it back to Patrick and his discussion.
So welcome back, everybody. We're sitting here with Bronwyn Saglimbeni. And before we went to the break, Bronwyn, you talked about 5 junk thoughts that really get in the way of really being effective, much less great communication. And the deltas being around superiority, inferiority, around scarcity, around a tribal us versus them kind of a vibe, perfection getting in the way, as well as playing the victim. And specific to where we started around sales and sales management, oftentimes I see superiority, inferiority being a big blocker. Because if I'm the AE, whether I'm at 5 years of experience or 20 years of experience, if I show up in front of the CEO, the CIO, the head of information security, somebody with a giant title, they're them and I'm me. And by definition, I feel inferior, right?
Yeah.
Give me some ways to decode that or for me to reorient my thinking that's going to help me be more effective in that meeting, whether it's one-on-one meeting or it's we're trying to move this deal along and we need to communicate effectively.
Well, you actually had 2 junk thoughts going on there. You had inferiority and you had tribalism. They're them and I'm me. So there's a couple things. The tribalism thing I want to tackle first because sure, on the surface, they're them and you're you. You're the AE, they're the C whatever O. But actually, you can choose to look at it that way and feel all the crappy feels that go with looking at it that way. Or you can look at it, these are a group of human beings coming into a room with chairs and a couple glasses of water. And we're going to come and we're going to talk about solving a problem. We're going to talk about creating a vision. We're going to talk about whatever the thing is.
Right.
And one of those perspectives yields interesting conversation, progress, insights. One of those conversations goes up and to the right for you career-wise, and one of them goes down and to the left. And I don't have to explain which one that is. If you feel like it's us and I'm just the AE and what the fuck am I going to say? It's going to help this conversation. It's a crash and burn waiting to happen.
Yes.
But if you're like, you know what? Titles actually aren't helpful to me in this moment. Right now, creating a vibe in this room where we are all rolling up our sleeves and trying to come up with a new conclusion, a new way of seeing this, a new way of solving something. That's powerful. But back to your issue around, let's say you are super junior and let's say you are the lowest on the totem pole. What then? I think the advice I always give people is never confuse a difference in title with existential worth, right? You're enough, but stop thinking about it. Right? It's like, don't let your ego make it even bigger than it needs to be. What you can do instead is think, okay, I know what I know. They know what they know. Together we'll know more. Now let's get on with it.
Right.
And so what does getting on with it look like? If you're super junior, that might look like you are the absolute best listener in that room. You're observing dynamics. You're seeing what's going on in a conversation at a level that the people in the hot seat may not be able to perceive because they're in the line of fire.
Right.
They're driving the leading, they're having all the hard things lobbed at them. So maybe if you're super junior, one way to add value and help is to listen really well or to ask good questions that people aren't asking because they're so caught up fighting this fire over here. Right?
Yes. Or everybody else who's pretending to listening, but actually they're just waiting for a break in the action so they can talk.
Exactly. And so the listening and asking good questions is always a good play, whether you're junior or senior, but especially when you're junior, you're trying to find your footing, right? But I also think if you are low on the totem pole, strategize with your team, the people that are higher up in the hierarchy than you ahead of time and say, hey, listen, this is what I'm thinking I can contribute to this. These are some questions I think are smart questions. Are they smart questions? Are they questions that are worthy of this conversation? If not, why not?
Yes.
Teach me what a smart question is. Don't just go in with guns a-blazing on day one and be like, here's my question. And the whole room is like, you know? So bulletproof it. Get help. What I think happens—
Have a plan.
What I think happens too often is we just assume that normal people can walk into a meeting and rock the party as brand new junior people. That is not how it works.
Nope.
Or it does work that way and you end up flailing and then now you have something you have to worry about next time. Like, oh my God, I went into that meeting and I tried to do my best and I ended up asking a really stupid question and my whole team was like, dude, why'd you ask that stupid question? So with so many things when it comes to communicating, a lot of life happens where we have to respond on the fly. It's improv, right?
Right.
But a lot of life happens with plenty of notice.
Yes.
We know what the meeting is. We know what could possibly go wrong. We can predict with about 80 to 90% accuracy where the bumps in the conversation are going to be and how to navigate around them. Or if you don't know the how, get your team together and strategize it. But we don't do it for some reason because we think it takes too much time. But a meeting that goes sideways takes way more time to repair than doing the homework ahead of time. So that's what I would say about that.
So a foundational element that might be, again, back to the scenario of I'm the junior person in a sales call, in a sales meeting, comes back to nerves. If I haven't been in combat too often, if I haven't seen the film, if I can't anticipate where this is going to go, I'm nervous.
Yeah.
Or it could be I'm really senior too, and I just don't like playing the big stage. And you coach people to give TED Talks and to go on Oprah. So we're not talking about junior varsity stuff here.
Yeah.
And you give a lot of presentations yourself to really big stages. Doesn't matter if it's the small room or you're getting ready to play the stadium. What are some pieces of advice or how do you deal with the nerves? What do you coach people to get your arms back around yourself and get back in control that allow you to actually shine and deliver when you need to deliver?
Yeah. The thing I like to remind myself and my clients is just because you feel nervous doesn't mean you're not ready. Right? Being nervous is part of being ready sometimes. In fact, there's a great Tony Robbins story. He was saying he once coached a musician that had terrible stage fright. And she was torpedoing a really promising career because she could not overcome the nerves.
Right.
And she felt like she was going to throw up. She felt like she was going to have a heart attack and she would just not go on stage. And so Tony Robbins tried to work with her. It never went anywhere. And we never heard from her again, presumably. Not that he named this person. But then he says, a few years later, he's on a private jet with Bruce Springsteen, as you do.
Right.
As we all have, of course.
Of course.
And he said to Bruce Springsteen, he's like, do you ever get nervous? And Bruce Springsteen's like, yeah, I get sick with nerves. And he says, before I go out on stage, I feel sick to my stomach. I think I'm going to throw up. I feel like I'm going to have a heart attack. And that's when I know I'm ready. I love that story because it is mindset. Like every time I give a keynote, I feel like I'm going to throw up. Every time I'm walking up the stairs, my mouth goes dry. When they're miking me up, my heart is racing. The difference is now I don't fight it. I don't feel like it's anything that's going to stop me. It's just adrenaline. It's just part of the process. So what do? How do you slow down heart rate? How do you find your voice when it's shaking with nerves? That is all breath work. Longer exhales than inhales. So inhale for 4, exhale for 8. Inhale for 4, exhale for 8. And so this expression that Christine Schaefer taught me, another great one, is if you can control your breath, you can control your voice. And you can also control your heart rate. So if your heart rate is low, that means your brain is functioning at peak performance. When your heart rate is super high and racy, it's that fight or flight thing.
Yep.
So that's one thing. Strategically and tactically, breath is the beginning and the end of everything. And people hate it when I say that because it's too simple, but it is the truth. But also, like if you're somebody, for example, I work with a lot of people who the mouth going dry thing is really real. Bring water on stage.
Yep.
Nobody's going to shoot you because you have a glass of water on stage. Or let's say you're somebody who's a big sweat person. I worked with a guy one time. He brought 6 shirts to his TED Talk. 6. And he went through all of them just waiting for his turn. And then when he was on stage, he saturated the 6th one. But you know what? Nobody cared because he was so good. He was killing it up there. I was like, oh, yeah, the guy's soaking through. He's giving everything he's got. I think part of the problem is we pathologize and demonize human reaction to adrenaline. It's just part of the deal.
Right.
So part of it is just have a plan. So if you're listening to this, how do your nerves manifest? Are you a heart rate person? Breathe. Are you a mouth dry person? Bring water on stage. Schedule your bathroom breaks beforehand. If you've got a ton of nervous energy, jump up and down, shake out your hands, ask your body what it needs, and it'll tell you, right? And then get your ass on stage and get her done.
Nice.
Right? But the other thing is too, I cannot state this enough. The pregame ritual for big moments is non-negotiable. It absolutely has to be a part of it. Maybe it's listening to Eminem, Lose Yourself before, while you're brushing your teeth to get fired up. Maybe it's 5 minutes of meditation. Maybe it's visualizing an outcome. There's a million ways to ritualize your own success and performance, but do not think you can perform at peak levels without a ritual.
Right.
You just can't. You're not going to get the best out of yourself. I think pregame rituals are so much fun that I don't know why we wouldn't do them. Like I have a whole thing.
I couldn't agree with you more. What it made me think, like one of the favorite things I ever saw, just as an aside on The Onion, was the headline was average man determined to be 4,000% less effective than he thinks he is when in an actual fight. Right? It's like everybody has this hero moment. They think it's just going to happen. And unless you're prepared, unless you have a plan, unless you can coach yourself, you are not going to be successful.
Or maybe you'll get lucky and it's one of those things where like a lightning struck and you crushed it once.
Yeah.
Like that's not what we're trying for. We're trying to create a situation where you have a foundation that makes you good every time, no matter what.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. So that's probably a good place to wrap up. Give me your perspective, Bronwyn, on somebody you worked closely with or maybe coached or were part of the team, whatever it might be, somebody who was a great communicator, and what is something that you took away that you filed away in your bag of tricks that you use every day? The best communicators I've seen, especially in a sales context, and I'm sure you'll know what I'm talking about, they're the folks who simultaneously make every conversation feel like it's the most important conversation. Mm-hmm. They're so present. And within that kind of presence, they're so relaxed. They're just completely in the moment. They're not trying to game the system. They're not trying to manipulate. They're relaxed and they're actually enjoying themselves. They're enjoying the story they're telling. They're enjoying the pitch that they're making. They're enjoying the give and take of checking in with an audience that sometimes is skeptical. They're not thrown off by it. They're just relaxed and present. And to me, we don't all want to go into meetings and have TED Talks happen. Right. That's not a win. No. What we do want are authentic conversations with real human beings. That's why when people are like, well, what do I do with my hands? I don't know. What does Pat do with his hands? What does Bronwyn do with her hands? We're all so individual, but our authenticity and individuality cannot shine through unless we feel relaxed and present. And that's the game right there. Relaxed, present, and remember to breathe. And remember to breathe. Starts and stops with breathing. So if people are looking for more information on you, on best practice in communication, need a coach for a TED Talk, where do they get in contact with you and find out more? They can find me on www.bronwyncommunications.com. That's BRONWYN. You know I love me some Instagram, Pat. So I'm at Bronwyn SF, like San Francisco on Instagram. And my podcast, 20 Minutes with Bronwyn. Just Google it. You can't miss it. Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing all of your insights. Have a fantastic day. You're the best. Fun times. You've been listening to another episode of Revenue Optimization Radio with your host, Patrick Morrissey from Altify, right here on the Funnel Radio Network.
for at-work listeners like you.